Cantrick was our form master at school, a short, strict man who wore a gray frock coat and had a shrewish face. He was roughly the same size and shape as Corporal Himmelstoss, the terror of Klosterberg Barracks. Incidentally, it's funny how often the miseries of this world are caused by short people. They are so much more quick tempered and difficult to get on with than tall ones. I've always tried to avoid landing up in companies with commanders who are short. Usually they're complete bastards. Cantrick kept on lecturing at us in the PT lessons until the entire class marched under his leadership down to the local recruiting office and enlisted. I can still see him, his eyes shining at us through his spectacles and his voice trembling with emotion as he asked, "You'll all go, won't you, lads?" Schoolmasters always seem to keep their sentiments handy in their waistcoat pockets. After all, they have to trot them out in lesson after lesson. But that never occurred to us for a moment at that time. In fact, one of our class was reluctant and didn't really want to go with us. That was Joseph Boehm, a tubby, cheerful chap. But in the end, he let himself be persuaded because he would have made things impossible for himself by not going. Maybe others felt the same way as he did, but it wasn't as easy to stay out of it because at that time, even our parents used the word coward at the drop of a hat. People simply didn't have the slightest idea of what was coming. As a matter of fact, it was the poorest and simplest people who were the most sensible. They saw the war as a disaster right from the start, whereas those who were better off were overjoyed about it, although they of all people should have been in a far better position to see the implications. Kaczynski says it is all to do with education. It softens the brain. And if Kat says something, then he has given it some thought. Oddly enough, Bain was the first one to be killed. He was shot in the eye during an attack, and we left him for dead. We couldn't take him with us because we had to get back in a great rush ourselves. That afternoon, we suddenly heard him shout out and saw him crawling around in no man's land. He'd only been knocked unconscious. Because he couldn't see and was mad with pain, he didn't take cover, so he was shot down from the other side before anyone could get out to fetch him. That can't be linked directly with Cantoric, of course. Where would we be if that counted as actual guilt? Anyway, there were thousands of Cantorics, all of them convinced that they were acting for the best, in the way that was the most comfortable for themselves. But as far as we are concerned, that is the very root of their moral bankruptcy. They were supposed to be the ones who would help us 18-year-olds to make the transition, who would guide us into adult life, into a world of work, of responsibilities, of civilized behavior and progress, into the future. Quite often we ridiculed them and played tricks on them, but basically we believed in them. In our minds, the idea of authority, which is what they represented, implied deeper insights and a more humane wisdom. But the first dead man that we saw shattered this conviction. We were forced to recognize that our generation was more honorable than theirs. They only had the advantage of us in phrase making and in cleverness. Our first experience of heavy artillery fire showed us our mistake, and the view of life that their teaching had given us fell to pieces under that bombardment. While they went on writing and making speeches, we saw field hospitals and men dying. While they preached the service of the state as the greatest thing, we already knew that the fear of death is even greater. This didn't make us into rebels or deserters or turn us into cowards, and they were more than ready to use all of those words because we loved our country just as much as they did, and so we went bravely into every attack. But now we were able to distinguish things clearly. All at once, our eyes had been opened, and we saw that there was nothing left of their world. Suddenly, we found ourselves horribly alone, and we had to come to terms with it alone as well.